Hey guys, this is Daniel Dr. D and welcome back to the channel. I've taken some screenshots from Morris at Shinjitsu Audio. This is one of his videos on baffle step correction and how to achieve bass from a small cabinet. And if you look at a lot of the modern speakers that we see today, you'll see they have a lot of bass, even though they're in a relatively narrow or small cabinet. And I highly recommend that you guys watch these videos by Morris at Shinjitsu Audio. I've placed a link in the description below for you guys, and watch these videos because he really explains how this technology works. And I think it's really great because you guys if you have followed me, you'll know that I have a Horn 2+2 and I built a DIY speaker using my Klipsch Heresy and the Forte from Klipsch. And so this endeavor I'm on here is a really fun endeavor, and Morris has made a modified version of that speaker that I did on the DIY, and I would highly recommend you go to Shinjitsu Audio's website and you can see what Morris did with the BEMA 12 BR70, and I'm going to do the same thing. But in the meantime, I have decided to trust Morris on this Hiro speaker because I just think he's put a lot of engineering and time into it, and it really deserves that attention. And he's done measurements on the Hiro speaker, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody has done a review, at least on video that I'm aware of, on the Hiro 8, which is the Mark Audio MA200 driver. And that driver is apparently measured to go from, I don't know, something like in the 30 hertz region on up to 20 kilohertz. So I have acquired that driver. I have also contacted Morris and said, look, I'm just going to give this a shot, and I want you to send me all the parts that I need to assemble the kit. So that's what you're going to see here. And I think the kit took a few weeks to get, because Morris had to get some parts and was waiting to get them back from the machine shop. I think it's all CNC'd. Those are the baffle step correctors. You can see the panels. The packing is second to none. The way they pack their stuff is just next level. I've never seen anyone with so much attention to detail and packing and with organization. So cables or everything are here, but I would still have my work cut out. These are another angle on the baffle step correctors, as well as the ports, which are 3 inches. And those ports are going to eventually end up being 6 inches, so with the extensions that I added. But these are the baffle step coils. This is the internal bracing for the interior of the cabinet. So pretty much everything's just cut out for you. But this is still going to require a tremendous amount of work, and if you don't have some experience, reasonable experience, and you don't have any sanding tools, and you may be in for a little bit of a ride with this. And this is a rosewood rosewood 1/4 inch front panel on top of birch ply. And the whole idea, the concept of the plies is to be exposed. It's just a cosmetic thing. Some people like it, some people don't. I don't normally do it this way. I have a lot of experience in woodworking, which is what this project is going to be about, for those of you who may be curious. Now, what I've done here is I've taken a piece of 3/4 inch ply, and I've 45 the corners. And I want to explain to you the benefits of doing it this way versus the other way. And that is, when you do a 45 cut, what's going to happen here is that you're going to have more surface area that you're working with. That means if I put a compound or epoxy or glue, then look at the amount of area on the right that you have using a 45-degree angle versus a 3/4 inch on the side. So you have more surface area that you're actually gluing to, which is very strong. A strong binding that you get. Now, I have over 30 years of experience doing these cabinets and stuff, boxes out of 3/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and 5/8 inch plies. So it's nothing new to me. I've been published in a couple of journals. But I will tell you, if you want to take on this project, if you do a 45 angle, you're going to have an imperfection somewhere when all the pieces are combined. If you look where my thumb is here, this is all you're going to have to sand down if you have a slight overlap. When you build a cabinet, you got to decide what side of the cabinet you want the overlap to be if there's just slight imperfections. This is a common thing, it's nothing new. But when you are working with a piece of plywood that's exposed like this, in the manner of the Shinjitsu, or the face of a plywood or the edge, you are going to have to sand down that entire 3/4 inch edge right there. Or you might have a scenario where it's the opposite, where the plywood is higher, and that means you're going to have to sand down the top of the plywood, which means you may penetrate into the ply into the next, and that is a real bear to deal with. This is why I say, if you're going to do this, in my opinion, it's easier to do a 45, but I didn't want to do that here because I wanted to just do this project the way Morris did it, the way he measured it, the way he designed it to be as original as possible, and just trust his method of doing it. Now, I'm not necessarily saying there isn't going to be, there's some acoustical compromises doing 45 versus the 3/4 inch, but I just wanted to do it his way. Again, I have a lot of experience with woodwork, so this is not a new thing, and I'm here to show you guys what my opinion is on how you should put these pieces together. Because when you sand corners on a 45 like what you see here, it is far easier to do. You're dealing with small amounts here. So if there is going to be an error, you try to get all the pieces matched up as best as possible, but you want the least, you're going to make compromises. But you just don't want to have those compromises exposed. You want them to be hidden somewhere in the cabinet. And I'm not saying they're all going to be defective, But here on the disadvantage of doing 45s, you're going to have to do, you're going to have to turn your blade. You're going to have to cut the pieces at 45. This uses up more wood. It's harder to do the cuts versus just doing straight cuts. Now here is when the cabinet is all assembled. And you have to do this really quick, okay? Because when this epoxy or compound, Type-On 2 in this case, applies, that stuff is rock solid. It ain't going anywhere. In fact, if you were to take a couple of plies and tear them apart, it will rip the plies out of the wood before the actual glue itself will break. So Type-On 2 is like one of my highest recommendations. Now, Morris has a different material that he uses, which is apparently good as well. I'm just so used to using this material, and I've been using it for over 20 years, so I'm just, comfortable with it, working with it. And you can see I use some blue tape. You have to be careful when you're using blue tape because you don't want the glue to get too dried underneath there, and then you're going to have to be sanding through it all. Now in this case I did have to do quite a bit of sanding. The grits that I recommend for sanding this type of project are going to be 80 grit and 100 grit, 120, and 150. If you have to live with the two, I would just do 100 grit and 150 grit. But the 80 grit is really good for sanding down the edges. And you can see on the interior there a bit, I made sure I took a sponge brush and glued in the corners and everything. Again, you got to work fast. You got to decide what compromises, where you're going to do these, push or apply pressure to keep the wood as close together as possible so you don't have, overlaps that are too exposed. Now here, if you look, you can see I've tried to make the top look as best as possible because one way or another, I'm going to have to sand down either the plywood, the entire, the sheet, or I'm going to have to sand down the edge of the 3/4 inch. Again, this is a cosmetic preference. Some people don't like it. When Klipsch did the OJazz, many people criticized the cabinet on the OJazz, the Klipsch OJazz, because plies were exposed. I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think what Morris has done is really beautiful, and Baltic birch is one of the most absolutely beautiful woods you can work with. In fact, all my cabinets that I did in the astronomy industry were made of Baltic birch with either stain or just clear finish. And one of the things that birch does when you apply a clear finish to it, is it has this mother of pearl look to it at certain angles in the sunlight that are truly gorgeous. And although birch is highly underrated, it is a gorgeous wood if it's done right. Now here I'm just showing you some of the little bit of edges here where I got some overlap. You'll see that's all going to have to be sanded down. This looks very crude when you first see it, very discouraging. Here you can see the ply is up a little bit, which is not good. That means I'm going to have to sand the tops down. And you have to be very careful because when you use an 80 grit wood, it can tear your wood up, and you want to be careful with that. So again, I have a lot of experience with this. This is nothing new. And, in my opinion, it is going to be harder, much harder, more labor intensive to do a cabinet with straight edges like this versus one that are 45 like you saw in the previous little clip. Here are a couple of 45 pieces of wood here, and I'm just basically showing you that little edge that you see protruding there is all you're going to have to sand down when you do 45s versus having to do an entire, side of an edge of a 3/4 inch piece of plywood. This is very thin line when it's sanded down, so if you, coat over it or whatever, very minimal noticeability, and you're only going to see it on the bottom because wherever you have to make a compromise, you're going to want to have it that you're going to have to make that mistake. There's going to be a mistake somewhere. It's going to have to be you want to get it on the bottom of the cabinet if you can. That's where you want the mistake to be if you're going to have it. Now this is all CNC machine, but it's not perfectly cut so that when you assemble it, you're not going to be doing any sanding. You will be doing sanding to do this. That's why I'm saying, unless Morris has some, way he does this, I had to do a lot of labor-intensive sanding on this. So, compared to what I'm normally used to doing. And, again, always going to be compromises. So just be aware of it. Okay, so what I've managed to do is I've sanded down these edges with 80 grit. Now you have to be careful because when you're working with birch ply, here, this is a very delicate wood. The veneers are extremely thin, the top veneer. But I did manage to get this down with an 80 grit. But you've got to be careful not to overlap and make any contact because you're going to get these tiny little swirls on the wood, that very delicate birch ply there. And then what I'll do is I'll go over it with some 120 and 150 over the whole surface just to level it all out. But so far it's looking really good. I got this little bit here. And I have to be careful not to go down too far on that birch. I think I got enough veneer to sand through to level it out with this ply right here without penetrating into the veneer. I think I got enough there. So it looks about maybe a 32nd of an inch. So now on this particular side, if you look close, you'll see the edge of the first bit of veneer there. If I level it with the edge of that 3/4 inch, it's going to almost penetrate into the next layer, which means it's going to be exposed. Fortunately, I just barely made it, but this is not the kind of situation you want to put yourself in. You're putting yourself behind the 8 ball, so to speak, in this regard. So, again, meticulous detail, pay attention, be very careful how far down you're sanding. And look, if you don't feel you're going to be able to do this or you're discouraged by it, I would just recommend that you just spend the money and let them do it for you and just have it built if you don't feel confident about doing this kind of work. That's my 2 cents on that. I've got a side sanded down and you can see that it looks quite nice. Again, very labor intensive. If I did the 45s, you would not have to spend a lot of time sanding this down. This here is another perspective from the front end here. Again, wherever the mistakes are going to be, you always want those mistakes to be in the bottom. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, why didn't you push the edge over a little bit in there so it wouldn't do that? Well, if I did that, I'd be compromising the other side. So it's just one of those scenarios you got to be careful with. Overall, came out quite good. Now here I have Minwax wax paste. And this stuff has been something I've used for, I don't know, many years. And I still have the same can. And, with all these new laws they have now, especially California, this highly regulated state, you can't get the same chemicals that were once, available due to environmental reasons and health reasons. And I just decided, I'm going to go back to the wax technique. Now, what's important is that I'm using a Scotch-Brite kind of pad. And you can do this with the grain of the wood or slightly against it just to get the wax in the wood and then go along it. But what is important is you let it sit and let it get into the wood real hard. And then when you come back to polish it, it'll have a harder surface so that it'll show sort of a semi-gloss sheen to it. And you can see the kind of the before and after. You can see one of the cabinets is finished here. And this is just a first coat. You can build those coats of wax and then polish them. And just give you an idea what it looks like before and after. Again, you can see the sides are all nicely sanded down, perfect. There is some discoloration in some of the plies. It's fine. It has just a nice natural ply look to it. These are the binding posts for the speaker cables. Really beautifully. Morris provided a copper kind. And then these are the braces, the internal braces. I just made a couple of slight additions to it. This is the baffle step corrector, which I eventually would use Velcro to rest on the bottom. When the BEMA project is done, this same baffle step coil can be used in the BEMA. This is the wiring schematic. You can see that the baffle step has 2 wires coming out of it, and they each are attached to the positive speaker terminal, and Morris provides a bridge cable for the negative. It just goes straight across. Very interesting, and super excited to hear it. Again, the binding post, so you can see here, beautiful quality parts. The holes were all pre-drilled. A little bit less labor, obviously, to do so. Again, on the inside, I did make some slight modifications just to fit the baffles in. So there was a loss of some baffling from some wood. So to compensate for that loss of wood, I added a couple of additional pieces just to reduce any resonance in there. Again, baffle step coil is inside there. You can see the wires and everything are connected internally. And the components that Morris uses are extremely high quality, in my opinion. Beautiful. Volti Audio, for example, is doing a lot of videos right now on comparing their stuff to Klipsch. And even though you pay a premium dollar for his speakers, you can see that the quality of wood and parts here is really nice. Morris uses basically the same quality components that Volti Audio does. Again, this is like a partial modern type of speaker, and I'm not into hi-fi speakers like these modern ones. I have no interest in them. This is strictly because you can use horns, and I'm using horns with this. Again, the bracing inside, you can see a good view here, perspective for you guys to see. You can see that the finishing came out quite nice. A lot of videos you're going to hear people say, oh, you shouldn't use this. I guarantee you, man, I don't care what product you use for woodworking. Somebody's always going to be out there in left field criticizing, oh, this will happen. Whatever, man. I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm not looking for advice necessarily here, although I am always open to it. But you're always going to get criticism. There's always just some hater out there that dislikes what you do or has some perspective of their own, In the end, you can look at the product and decide for yourself what you think. Does it look nice? Now, in the next video, what you guys are going to see is the horn applied to the top. The horn is not on top yet. This is a two-way speaker. And once those are ready, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have a part 2 to this video where you're going to hear sound demos against the Klipsch, against the MagnaPen. It's going to be a beautiful comparison. So I'm very excited about doing that. Now, in case you're wondering where the stands come from, they are hairpin stands from Amazon. You can get a set of 4 for about $18. And so 8 legs in total. I like hairpin legs. They just have a nice vintage kind of mid-century look to them, and I just love that look. And, I think the way a speaker looks is important. So this here is the new Horn 2+2 that Morris is doing. Now, people who have the previous model like I did are able to upgrade to this newer model, which is what I'm doing. And the reason for this is I believe Morris has changed a few components on it, which you can see before and after if you were to compare, and there's an additional coil here. And this is basically going to allow the frequency to be somewhere, I think, in the range, at least for the Mark audio driver, to go up to around 2000 hertz. That's going to be the cutoff frequency. And then the horn will handle everything above up to around 20 kilohertz. The other thing is that this new design is supposed to help prevent overlap with the frequency range. So you get less bleeding of one frequency into another, is my understanding of it. Overall, an improvement. The other thing, for those of you wondering, is that they are supposed to be around 93 dB efficient, and they are 8 ohm speakers. So they should be compatible with the Analog Ethos 81-C that I have, as well as the Dynakits quite fine. And these are not for headbanging anyway, even though I'm sure they can. So this is going to conclude the first part of the Shinjitsu Hiro speaker project. And we'll be back at you soon. Thanks for watching.